Welcome back, class. We're on session 9. This is going to be part 7 that we will deal with the predecessor of Gerald Ford. Of Richard Nixon, which is Gerald Ford. Now, Ford, guys, I always like to point out, Gerald Ford was our 38th president. He was never a vice president. Spiro Agnew had actually been Nixon's vice president. He had got in trouble. He had got moved out of office. So then you have Ford steps in, and so he takes the vice presidency. Richard Nixon gets ran off, and now Gerald Ford is our president. He's the 38th president. He's a Republican. He is 61 years old. I don't know. I have maybe received 1 or 2 Gerald Ford papers ever. Like I said, October the 10th, 1973, Vice President Spiro Agnew resigns and pleads no contest to criminal charges. Richard Nixon's administration, guys, was just full of controversy. And like I said, Ford will come in and he'll take over the vice presidency. Nixon gets impeached. And the one thing that Ford will do is Gerald Ford will pardon Richard Nixon. And he takes a lot of criticism. And Gerald Ford, it's really kind of interesting because Gerald Ford will run under that Republican ticket, okay? And a guy that he beats out, now I'm jumping up in time because he will run in the Republican ticket. That's the ticket, by the way, Jimmy Carter will win. But he beats out a guy named Ronald Reagan. Reagan almost beat him out to take the Republican nomination, and he didn't, which is really interesting because a lot of people think if Reagan had won that nomination, Reagan could have beat Carter, and we might have got Reagan there earlier. But Gerald Ford wins the nomination, and Gerald Ford will lose to Jimmy Carter. The only thing on his, like I said, I don't get a lot of papers on him. I will say Gerald Ford was one of our only presidents that was a college athlete. He played football for Michigan. Very athletic guy. But Gerald Ford will have the last say in Vietnam. During Gerald Ford's administration, North Vietnam forces will go into South Vietnam. South Vietnam will ask for the last hope of American assistance, and Gerald Ford will deny them because he does not want to send troops back into Vietnam. And remember, we talked about that all the way back from the Truman administration, how communist Russia was moving in. Communism was seeping through all these nations. Remember, it tried to come through South Korea. It went from North Korea to South Korea during the Truman administration, and Vietnam is the same thing. It's a little Asian, so you've got North and South Vietnam, and again, it's the North that's controlled by the Soviets. We control the South. Once we eventually pulled out of Vietnam, the communist forces took the whole state over. So all of Vietnam now is not divided anymore. And again, that kind of ends up, and probably the biggest controversy with Gerald Ford is he will pardon Richard Nixon. Takes a lot of criticism for that. Gerald Ford's decision to do that was based on the fact that our country could not get over that whole thing until he pardoned him. He'll actually live to be 93 years old. Lives pretty old. He's one of our oldest living presidents. I want to say George H. Bush maybe will eventually beat that record. But Gerald Ford, like I said in the beginning, was not a bad guy. He just wasn't a very strong president. Our next president is going to be another individual that I don't think was a great president, but is a moralist. I think he was very good. Remember, we talked about FDR had a girlfriend, JFK had girlfriends. All these guys were not what we would consider moralists. The next president, the 39th president, will be. And during that session, I get to introduce you to Jimmy Carter. Hi, guys. We'll see you then on the next one.